Guys, no. Stop. Okay. Alright, okay. Molly, come here. Come here, Molly. Jaeger. Jaeger. There you go. Molly, come here. There you go. There you go. That's my girl. There you go. Oh, your cookie fell? I got you. There you go. There you go. Good girl. Good girl. Jaeger, don't eat the whole cookie right away. Hi everyone, it's Auntie and Molly, Storytime here. We're going to be reading another few chapters from the BFG. Molly is currently enjoying her afternoon cookie, and I thought it might be fun to give her some treats while we're reading too, so she doesn't just sleep through the whole thing like last time. And Jaeger is also here, so you may hear him crying occasionally. Jaeger, is that good? Yeah, good boy. Okay, let's get started. So I don't know if you remember what happened last time, if you watched the video, but last time we saw Sophie meet the BFG for the first time, and they went to his cave, and she saw the other giants and realized how scary they were. So now we're going to find out what happens next. Back in the cave, the big friendly giant sat Sophie down once again on the enormous table. "Is you quite squiggly there in your nightie?" he asked. "You isn't friggy cold?" "I'm fine," Sophie said. "I cannot help thinking," said the BFG, "about your poor mother and father. By now they must be jipping and scumping all over the house, shouting, 'Hurrah, hurrah, where's Sophie gone?'" "I don't have a mother and father," Sophie said. "They both died when I was a baby." "Oh, you poor little scrumplet," cried the BFG. "Is you not missing them very badly?" "Not really," Sophie said, "because I never knew them." "You is making me sad," the BFG said, rubbing his eyes. "Don't be sad," Sophie said. "No one is going to be worrying too much about me. That place you took me from was the village orphanage. We're all orphans in there." "You is an orphan?" "Yes." "How many is there in there?" 10 of us," Sophie said. "All little girls." "Was you happy there?" the BFG asked. "I hated it," Sophie said. "The woman who ran it was called Mrs. Clonkles, and if she caught you breaking any of the rules, like getting out of bed at night or not folding up your clothes, you got punished." "How was you getting punished?" "She locked us in the dark cellar for a day and a night without anything to eat or drink." "The rotten old rot scrapper!" cried the BFG. "It was horrid," Sophie said. "We used to dread it. There were rats down there. We could hear them creeping about." "The filthy old fizzwiggler!" shouted the BFG. "That is the horridest thing I is hearing for years. You is making me sadder than ever." All at once, a huge tear that would have filled a bucket rolled down one of the BFG's cheeks and fell with a splash to the floor. It made quite a puddle. Sophie watched with astonishment. "What a strange and moody creature this is," she thought. "One moment he is telling me my head is full of squashed flies, and the next moment his heart is melting for me because Mrs. Clonkers locked us in the cellar." "The thing that worries me," Sophie said, "is having to stay in this dreadful place for the rest of my life. The orphanage was pretty awful, but I wouldn't have been there forever, would I?
All is my fault, the BFG said. I is the one who kid-snatched you. Yet another enormous tear welled from his eyes and splashed onto the floor.
Now I come to think of it, I won't actually be here all that long, Sophie said.
I is afraid you will, the BFG said.
No, I won't, Sophie said. Those brutes out there are bound to catch me sooner or later and have me for tea.
I is never letting that happen, the BFG said. For a few moments, the cave was silent. Then Sophie said,
May I ask you a question?
The BFG wiped the tears from his eyes with the back of his hand and gave Sophie a long, thoughtful stare. Shoot away, he said.
Would you please tell me what you were doing in our village last night? Why you were poking that long trumpet thing into the Gucci children's bedroom and then blowing through it?
Aha! Cried the BFG, sitting up suddenly in his chair. Now we is getting nosier than a porker.
And the suitcase you were carrying, Sophie said. What on earth was that all about?
The BFG stared suspiciously at the little girl sitting cross-legged on the table. You is asking me to tell you whoopsie big secrets, he said. Secrets that nobody is ever hearing before.
I won't tell a soul, Sophie said. I swear it. How could I anyway? I'm stuck here for the rest of my life.
You could be telling the other giants.
No, I couldn't, Sophie said. You told me they would eat me up the moment they saw me.
And so they would, said the BFG. You is a human being, and human beings is like strawbunkles and cream to those giants.
If they're going to eat me the moment they see me, then I wouldn't have time to tell them anything, would I?
Sophie said. You wouldn't.
Then why did you say I might?
Because I is brimful of buzzburgers, the BFG said. If you listen to everything I am saying, you will be getting earache.
Please tell me what you were doing in our village, Sophie said. I promise you can trust me.
Would you be teaching me how to make an elephant? The BFG asked.
What do you mean?
Sophie said. I would dearly love to have an elephant to ride on, the BFG said dreamily. I would so much love to have a jumbly big elephant and go riding through green forests picking peachy fruits off the trees all day long. This is a sizzling hot muck-frumping country we is living in. Nothing grows in it except snows-cumbers. I would love to go somewhere else and pick peachy fruits in the early morning from the back of an elephant. Sophie was quite moved by this curious statement.
Perhaps one day we will get you an elephant, she said, and peachy fruits as well. Now, tell me what you were doing in our village.
If you is really wanting to know what I am doing in your village, the BFG said, I is blowing a dream into the bedroom of those children.
Blowing a dream?
Sophie said.
What do you mean?
I is a dream-blowing giant, the BFG said. When all the other giants is galloping off every way in which to swallow up human beings, I is scuttling away to other places to blow dreams into the bedrooms of sleeping children. Nice dreams. Lovely golden dreams. Dreams that is giving the dreamers a happy time.
Now, hang on a minute, Sophie said. Where do you get the dreams?
I collect them, the BFG said, waving an arm towards the rows and rows of bottles on the shelves. I has billions of them.
You can't collect a dream, Sophie said. A dream isn't something you can catch hold of.
You is never going to understand about it, the BFG said. That is why I is not wishing to tell you.
Oh, please tell me, Sophie said. I will understand. Go on. Tell me how you collect dreams. Tell me everything.
The BFG settled himself comfortably in his chair and crossed his legs. Dreams, he said, is very mysterious things. They is floating around in the air like little wispy misty bubbles. And all the time they is searching for sleeping people.
Can you see them?
Sophie asked. Never at first.
Then how do you catch them if you can't see them?
Sophie asked. Aha, said the BFG. Now we is getting on to the dark and dusky secrets.
I won't tell a soul.
I is trusting you, the BFG said. He closed his eyes and sat quite still for a moment, while Sophie waited. A dream, he said, as it goes whiffling through the night air, is making a tiny little buzzing humming noise. But this little buzzy hum is so silvery soft, it is impossible for a human being to hear it.
Can you hear it?
Sophie asked. The BFG pointed up at his enormous truck wheel ears, which he now began to move in and out. He performed this exercise proudly, with a little proud smile on his face. Is you seeing these?
How could I miss them?
Sophie said. They maybe is looking a bit preposterous to you, the BFG said, but you must believe me when I say they is very extra usual ears indeed. They is not to be coughed at.
I'm quite sure they're not,
Sophie said. They is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing.
You mean you can hear things I can't hear?
Sophie said. You is deaf as a dumpling compared to me, cried the BFG. You is hearing only thumping loud noises with those little earwigs of yours, but I am hearing all the secret whisperings of the world.
Such as what?
Sophie asked. In your country, he said, I is hearing the footsteps of a ladybird as she goes walking across a leaf.
Honestly?
Sophie said, beginning to be impressed. What's more, I is hearing those footsteps very loud, the BFG said. When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her feet go clumpity-clumpity-clump, like giant's footsteps.
Good gracious me,
Sophie said.
What else can you hear?
Molly! Sorry guys, hold on one second. Molly girl! Come on, babe. Molly! Molly! Come here, baby. Okay, I think we lost her for a moment, but she'll come back when she's ready. Molly! Come here, babe. Okay.
Good gracious me,
Sophie said.
What else can you hear?
I is hearing the little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil.
You mean you can hear ants talking?
Every single one, the BFG said. Although I is not exactly understanding their language.
Go on,
Sophie said. Sometimes, on a very clear night, the BFG said, and if I is swiggling my ears in the right direction, and here he swiveled his great ears upwards, so they were facing the ceiling. If I is swiggling them like this, and the night is very clear, I is sometimes hearing faraway music coming from the stars in the sky. A queer little shiver passed through Sophie's body. She sat very quiet, waiting for more. My ears is what told me you was watching me out your window last night, the BFG said.
But I didn't make a sound,
Sophie said. I was hearing your heartbeat across the road, the BFG said, loud as a drum.
Go on, Sophie said, please.
I can hear plants and trees.
Do they talk?
Sophie asked. They is not exactly talking, the BFG said, but they is making noises. For example, if I come along and I is picking a lovely flower, if I is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, then the plant is screaming. I can hear it screaming and screaming very clear.
You don't mean it, Sophie cried. How awful!
It is screaming just like you would be screaming if someone was twisting your arm right off.
Is this really true?
Sophie asked. You think I is Swiss fiddling you?
It is rather hard to believe.
Then I is stopping right here, said the BFG sharply. I is not wishing to be called a fibster.
Oh no, I'm not calling you anything, Sophie cried. I believe you. I do, really. Please, go on.
The BFG gave her a long, hard stare. Sophie looked right back at him, her face open to his.
I believe you,
she said softly. She had offended him. She could see that. I wouldn't ever be fibbling to you, he said.
I know you wouldn't, Sophie said. But you must understand that it isn't easy to believe such amazing things straight away.
I understand that, the BFG said.
So, do please forgive me and go on, she said.
He waited a while longer, and then he said, It is the same with trees as it is with flowers. If I is chopping an axe into the trunk of a big tree, I is hearing a terrible coming from the heart of the tree.
What sort of sound?
Sophie asked. A soft moaning sound, the BFG said. It is like the sound of an old man is making when he's dying slowly. He paused. The cave was very silent. Trees is living and growing just like you and me, he said. They is alive. So is plants. He was sitting very straight in his chair now, his hands clasped tightly together in front of him. His face was bright, his eyes round and bright as two stars. Such wonderful and terrible sounds I is hearing, he said. Some of 'em you would never wish to be hearing yourself. But some is like glorious music. He seemed almost to be transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions.
Tell me some more about them,
Sophie said quietly.
There you go. There you go.
Whoop. Oh no, technical difficulties. Okay. Sorry, guys.
Tell me some more about them,
Sophie said quietly. You just ought to be hearing the little miceys talk, he said. Little miceys is always talking to each other, and I is hearing them loud as my own voice.
What do they say?
Sophie asked. Only miceys know that, he said. Spiders is also talking a great deal. You might not be thinking it, but spiders is the most tremendous natterboxes. And when they is spinning their webs, they is singing all the time. They is singing sweeter than a nightingale.
Who else do you hear?
Sophie asked. One of the biggest chatterboxes is them caterpillars, the BFG said.
What do they say?
They is arguing all the time about who is going to be the prettiest butterfly. They is all always talking about who that's going to be.
Is there a dream floating around in here now?
Sophie asked. The BFG moved his great ears this way and that, listening intently. He shook his head. There is no dream in here, he said, excepting in the bottles. I has a special place to go for catching dreams. They is not often common to giant country.
How do you catch them?
The same way you is catching butterflies, the BFG answered, with a net. He stood up and crossed over to the corner of the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was about 30 feet long, and there was a net at the end of it. "Here is the dream catcher," he said, grasping the pole with one hand. "Every morning I is going out and snitching new dreams to put in my bottles." Suddenly, he seemed to lose interest in the conversation. "I is getting hungry. It is time for eats." Come on. Come on, sweetie. Come on. There you go. Good girl. Good girl.
"But if you don't eat people like all the others," Sophie said, "then what do you live on?"
"That is a squelchin' tricky problem around here," the BFG answered. "In this slosh-funkin' giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It is called the snozzcumber."
"The snozzcumber?" cried Sophie. "There's no such thing."
The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. "Yesterday," he said, "we was not believing in giants, was we? Today we is not believing in snozzcumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own 2 little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper?"
"I beg your pardon?"
Sophie said. "And the great humplecrips."
"What's that?"
Sophie said. "And the rap rascal."
"The what?"
Sophie said. "And the crumpscrubble."
"Are they animals?"
Sophie asked. "They is common animals," said the BFG contemptuously. "I is not a very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool."
"You mean cotton wool,"
Sophie said. "What I mean and what I say is 2 different things," the BFG announced rather grandly. "I will now show you a snozzcumber." The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse knobbles. "Here is the repulsant snozzcumber," cried the BFG, waving it about. "I squoggle it, I mispise it, I dispunge it. But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans."
"You mean skin and bones,"
Sophie said. "I know it is bones," the BFG said, "but please understand that I cannot be helping it if I sometimes is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time." The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset.
"I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to be rude."
"There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country," the BFG said sadly.
"But couldn't your mother have taught you?"
Sophie asked. "My mother?" cried the BFG. "Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that."
"I did not know that,"
Sophie said. "Who ever heard of a woman giant?" shouted the BFG, waving the snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. "There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men." Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled.
"In that case," she said, "how were you born?"
Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars.
And when did you appear?
Sophie asked. Now, how on earth would I be knowing that thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count.
You mean you don't even know how old you are?
No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old. Very, very old and crumply. Perhaps as old as the earth.
What happens when a giant dies?
Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time tiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthling, he sputtered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgustorous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggot-wise. Try it for yourself, this foulsome snozzcumber.
No, thank you,
Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go. Sophie took a small nibble.
Ugh!
She sputtered.
Oh no! Oh gosh! Oh help!
She spat it out quickly.
It tastes of frog skins,
she gasped.
And rotten fish!
Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me it is tasting of cockroaches and slime wanglers.
Do we really have to eat it?
You do, unless you is wanting to become so thin you become disappearing into a thick ear.
Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different.
Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is oh so twitch-tickling problem for me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other they is always coming out squiggled around.
That happens to everyone, Sophie said.
Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish.
I think you speak beautifully,
Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do?
Simply beautifully,
Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you is not twiddling my leg?
Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk.
How wondercrump, said the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers! How absolutely squiffling! I is all a stutter.
Listen, Sophie said. We don't have to eat snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflower and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting?
The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honourable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing some rotsome snozzcumbers than snitching things from other people.
You stole me,
Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you was only a tiny little girl. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice thundered outside. "Runt! Is you dare, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the blood bottler!" But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partially eaten snozzcumber was lying next to her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Pill fizz!" shouted the blood bottler. "Bugs wallop!" he boomed. "You is talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." "No, no!" cried the BFG. "Yos, yos!" boomed the blood bottler. "I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winking it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. "There is no one in here," he stammered. "Why don't you leave me alone?" The blood bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little swish figgler, squimpy little bottle wart, prunty little pog swizzler. I is now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasty little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozzcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The blood bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish pink. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. The ears were tiny black holes. The nose was small, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dirty as a dog's woggler," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the blood bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting from fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the blank table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table, so where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So, this is the filsome, rotsome glubbage you is eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partially eaten snozzcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squabbish." For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "That is a scrumdiddlyumptious snozzcumber," he said. "I is guzzling it gleefully every day and night. Is you never trying a snozzcumber, blood bottler?" "Human beings is juicier," the blood bottler said. "You is talking rummy talk," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on. "But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitch it for my supper." The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small, piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch-fiddling me, is you?" said the blood bottler. "Never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out, 'Oh, how scrumptious this wonder veg is!'" The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It's not just healthsome always to be eating meaty things." "Just this once," the blood bottler said, "I is going to be taste this rotsome eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it is filsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head." He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge chunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. "Ugh!" roared the blood bottler. "Ugh! Blech! Ugh!" And then he spat. All of the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine buggler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig's willer. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the blood bottler. That is the most disgustrous taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans. Eating human beans is wrong, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptious, shouted the blood bottler. And tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble up a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the blood bottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in this scruddling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school childers, the blood bottler said. I is very fond indeed of English school childers. They has a nice inky booky flavour. Perhaps I will change my mind to go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant peoples, shouted the blood bottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squeaky little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood bottler giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filthum snozzcumbers, and you was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chudler, cried the BFG. You was all covered in snozzcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I is hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them. Every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can't think up a way of doing it. All right, that is it for today. If anybody has any comments or questions or recommendations for me, please let me know. Send me a message or post on the Facebook group. I'm going to create another event for tomorrow and for the rest of the week at the same time. And you guys can either catch up on the meeting or on the event pages, or you can find it on my page. Thank you so much, everyone. Molly, say bye. Bye.